Imagine a world where entire continents were unknown, hidden behind endless oceans and myths. A world where maps ended abruptly at the edge of the sea, and beyond them stretched the terrifying unknown. Long before the famous voyage of 1492, people across Europe, Asia, and Africa relied on stories, travelers, tales, and fragments of maps to imagine the lands that lay far beyond their reach. Most people believed the earth was flat, or that monstrous sea creatures lurked in the depths, ready to drag unsuspecting sailors into darkness. Legends told of islands inhabited by giants, of rivers of fire, and forests so dense that no human could ever penetrate them. The very idea of traveling across the oceans seemed madness. Those who dared to dream of distant lands were considered reckless or even cursed. Yet, curiosity has a way of defying fear. Traders, sailors, and adventurers whispered about strange lands across the Atlantic. They spoke of shores with fertile soil, untold riches, and people who lived in ways completely different from their own. These whispers often reached only the ears of those brave or foolish enough to act on them. Some explorers claimed to have glimpsed lands far away, but without proof, their stories were dismissed as fairy tales. Few historians paid attention to the subtle hints scattered across centuries. Take the Vikings, for example. Long before Columbus, Norse sailors had braved the cold, stormy waters of the North Atlantic. They traveled from Scandinavia to Iceland and then to Greenland. Around the year 1000 AD, a daring Viking named Leif Erikson sailed even further west and reached a place he called Vinland. Thought to be part of modern-day Canada, this journey was no small feat. The seas were rough, navigation tools were primitive, and supplies were limited. Yet, these fearless explorers managed to cross hundreds of miles of uncharted ocean, establishing temporary settlements and trading with the local indigenous peoples. Their voyages were incredible achievements. Yet for centuries, they were forgotten, buried under the story of Columbus. The world at this time was changing. Trade was growing, cities were expanding, and nations were beginning to compete for wealth and influence. The thirst for knowledge, wealth, and power drove explorers to risk everything. In Mediterranean ports, sailors exchanged stories of lands across the seas, and in marketplaces, merchants whispered about treasures to be found beyond the horizon. Yet, Europe remained largely ignorant of what truly lay to the west. Maps often included fanciful illustrations of sea monsters and impossible islands, reflecting both the curiosity and fear of the unknown. But exploration is rarely driven by curiosity alone. Survival, politics, and economics often play a larger role than we realize. Traders were eager to find new routes to Asia for spices, silk, and gold. Kingdoms wanted to expand their influence, claiming lands before rival nations could. Religion also played a part. Missionaries dreamed of spreading their faith to new peoples. Each of these forces added pressure, pushing sailors and explorers to risk dangerous journeys into waters no one had ever charted. Stories from sailors who returned from distant voyages were crucial in shaping the imagination of Europe. One such tale tells of islands where the trees bore gold and silver, where animals were unlike any known species, and where the people lived in harmony with nature, untouched by war or disease. While many dismissed these tales as exaggerations or fantasies, they inspired a generation of explorers who believed that the unknown seas held real wonders. It wasn't only the Vikings who dared to dream. Other sailors from Portugal, Spain, and Italy experimented with long-distance navigation. They developed more accurate maps, improved ships, and better understanding of the winds and currents. These advancements were slow and often dangerous. Many ships were lost at sea, their crews never seen again. The ocean, vast and unforgiving, claimed countless lives. And yet, the knowledge gained from these attempts laid the groundwork for the age of exploration. Even everyday people, not just kings and sailors, played a role in fueling the mystery. Stories passed down through generations kept the idea of unknown lands alive. Minstrels sang of hidden kingdoms. Merchants told of islands with abundant spices, and travelers shared sketches of strange coastlines and creatures. These stories, though often inaccurate, kept the imagination alive. People could picture the distant shores and dream of what might lie there, even if they themselves would never see them. The period before Columbus was also marked by a mixture of fear and fascination with the unknown. Sailors spoke of waters so cold they could freeze men to death, and of whirlpools so strong that they could swallow entire ships. fish, sea serpents, and invisible islands were widely believed. These fears were not entirely unfounded. Navigation was primitive, weather prediction was impossible, and supplies were limited. Every voyage was a gamble with life itself. Yet, it was precisely this danger that made the rewards of discovery so compelling. So, when we think about America's discovery, it is important to remember that it was not a single moment in history. It was the result of centuries of curiosity, risk, and human ingenuity. Explorers who dared to challenge the unknown, traders who shared rumors of distant lands, and ordinary people who dreamed of what lay beyond the horizon. All of them contributed to the moment when a European ship finally sighted the shores of the New World. By the time Columbus prepared for his famous voyage, Europe was already primed with anticipation. The knowledge gathered by previous explorers, the tales of Viking voyages, and the relentless curiosity of humankind created the perfect storm for discovery. Columbus would not have sailed in isolation. He stood on the shoulders of those who dared to imagine the impossible. In the end, the story of pre-Columbian exploration teaches us something timeless. Human curiosity cannot be contained. No map, no fear, and no myth can stop the desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. From the icy waters of the North Atlantic to the bustling ports of southern Europe, a quiet revolution of exploration was taking place, and when Columbus finally set sail, it was not the beginning, but rather the continuation of a journey that had already been centuries in the making. Did you know that Christopher Columbus wasn't the first European to set foot in the Americas? While most of us were taught in school that Columbus discovered America in 1492, the truth is far more fascinating and far older. Long before Columbus's 3 ships sailed across the Atlantic, others had braved the unknown seas and reached these distant lands, leaving footprints in history that were mostly forgotten. Around the year 1000 AD, nearly 500 years before Columbus, the Vikings, fierce seafarers from Scandinavia, ventured westward in search of new lands. Ancient Norse sagas tell the story of Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, who left Greenland in search of fertile lands across the ocean. He sailed across the cold, icy waters of the North Atlantic, a journey full of danger. Storms battered the ships, the winds were unpredictable, and navigation tools were primitive. Yet, somehow, Erikson and his crew reached a land they called Vinland. Thought by historians to be part of modern-day Newfoundland in Canada, the Vikings didn't just sight these lands. They explored, settled, and traded. They built temporary settlements, cut down forests, hunted, and fished. They interacted with the indigenous peoples, exchanging goods and knowledge. Archaeological evidence, like the site at Oaks Meadows, proves that these Norsemen were real, and that Vinland was more than a story. It was a historical place, but despite their remarkable achievements, these early settlements didn't last. Harsh winters, isolation, and possibly conflicts with local populations forced the Vikings to abandon Vinland. Their story faded from European memory for centuries, and the idea of a new world across the Atlantic became little more than legend. Meanwhile, other European nations were beginning to look west with growing interests. By the late 15th century, the age of maritime exploration had begun. Nations like Portugal, Spain, and England were eager to expand their trade routes and find new sources of wealth. Among these explorers was John Cabot, an Italian navigator sailing under the English flag. In 1497, Cabot crossed the Atlantic, aiming to discover new lands for England. He reached the coast of what is now Canada, opening a new chapter in the history of exploration. Cabot's voyage, like those of the Vikings, was no small feat. Crossing the Atlantic at the time was incredibly dangerous. Ships were small, made of wood, and vulnerable to storms. Crews often faced starvation, disease, and the unknown perils of uncharted waters. Cabot and his men sailed for weeks, guided by limited maps, the stars, and their own courage. When they finally reached land, it must have felt like stepping into a completely new world. The forests stretched endlessly, animals roamed freely, and the people they met lived in ways utterly different from anything Europeans had known. What makes these early voyages so remarkable is that they were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger story of human curiosity, courage, and persistence. The Vikings, Cabot, and other explorers did not discover the Americas in the sense of being the first humans. Their indigenous peoples had been living on the continents for thousands of years. But in terms of European knowledge, they were the first to cross oceans, map new lands, and open the doors to a world previously unknown to Europe. These forgotten voyages also highlight how exploration is rarely a single, dramatic moment. Discovery is a process, a series of small, brave steps into the unknown. The Vikings' journey to Vinland may not have changed the course of European history immediately, but it demonstrated that crossing the Atlantic was possible. Cabot's journey, coming centuries later, showed that such voyages could be repeated and expanded upon, paving the way for future explorers like Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, and Ferdinand Magellan. Explorers faced constant danger. The North Atlantic, for instance, is notorious for sudden storms and icy waters. Sailors had no accurate maps, no understanding of the currents in some regions, and no way to communicate with other ships if they became separated. Even seasoned navigators relied on the stars, sun, and simple tools like the astrolabe to guide them. A single mistake could mean death, lost supplice, or shipwreck on a hostile shore. Despite these dangers, the drive to explore persisted. It was fueled by ambition, curiosity, and sometimes desperation, the hope of finding new lands, wealth, or opportunities that did not exist at home. These voyages also transformed European thinking. Before the Vikings, Cabot, or Columbus, the world was largely confined to Europe, parts of Asia, and North Africa. Maps were limited and often filled with speculation or mythical lands. But with each successful expedition, Europe began to understand that the world was much larger and more diverse than anyone had imagined. New maps were drawn, new trade routes were planned, and the idea of a new world started to take shape. In 1492, the world as Europeans knew it was on the brink of a revolution. The known world was confined to Europe, parts of Asia and the Mediterranean. Trade with the East was difficult and expensive, and the thirst for spices, silk, gold, and other treasures was immense. European nations competed fiercely for access to these riches, and explorers were eager to find new routes to Asia that could bypass long, dangerous land passages controlled by rival powers. Amid this backdrop of ambition and curiosity, a Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus approached the Spanish monarchy with a daring plan. He proposed that by sailing west across the Atlantic, he could reach Asia faster than existing routes around Africa. Many laughed at the idea. The earth was round, yes, but the distances were considered impossible. The journey too dangerous, and the unknown seas terrifying. Yet, Columbus convinced Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand to fund his expedition, promising wealth, prestige, and glory for Spain. Columbus set sail with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Each vessel was modest in size, wooden and vulnerable, equipped with limited supplies for what would be a journey of uncertainty and danger. The crews were a mix of sailors, adventurers, and laborers, many of whom were skeptical and fearful. The Atlantic was vast and unforgiving. Storms could appear without warning. Supplies could run out, and sickness could spread through the cramped ships. The psychological pressure was just as intense as the physical danger. For weeks, the sailors had nothing but the endless horizon, the rising and falling of the waves, and the fear of the unknown. As days turned into weeks, fear and tension grew on the ships. The men began to doubt the wisdom of the journey. Some feared they would never see land again. Others whispered about sea monsters or being forever lost at sea. Columbus, however, remained resolute, guided by faith, determination, and the careful calculations he had made. His persistence, leadership, and vision kept the crew moving forward, even when morale dipped dangerously low. Then, after more than 2 months at sea, the moment that would change history arrived. Land appeared on the horizon, a small island in the Caribbean. The sailors' relief was overwhelming. Columbus, believing he had reached the outskirts of Asia, claimed the land for Spain and named it San Salvador. He had not reached Asia, of course, but instead had stumbled upon a new world, a continent unknown to Europe but inhabited by diverse civilizations. This misidentification would shape the narrative of European exploration for centuries. As Columbus was celebrated for finding the route to riches that he had imagined in Asia, Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean marked a turning point in history. The world that Europeans thought they knew suddenly expanded, and the possibilities seemed endless. Wealth, land, and resources that had previously been unimaginable were now within reach. His voyage opened the floodgates for European exploration and colonization, setting in motion a wave of expeditions by Spain, Portugal, and later other nations. Within decades, entire continents were being mapped, claimed, and exploited. Yet, Columbus's story is not just one of glory. The untold side of discovery lies in the lives of the people he met, the Native Americans. For them, the arrival of Columbus and his men was a profound and disruptive event. The Taino people of the Caribbean had lived for centuries in thriving communities, with rich traditions, agriculture, and social structures. They welcomed the newcomers with curiosity and hospitality, offering food and guidance, believing in peaceful coexistence. Columbus, however, driven by European notions of conquest and wealth, quickly imposed his authority, taking resources and claiming land for Spain. This interaction led to cultural exchange, but also conflict and tragedy. The introduction of new crops, animals, and technologies changed life in the Caribbean, but so did the arrival of diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles. Indigenous populations, with no immunity, suffered devastating losses. Communities were destroyed, traditions disrupted, and social structures collapsed under the pressure of colonization. Columbus's voyages, while celebrated in European history, marked the beginning of a period of immense suffering for the native peoples of the Americas. Columbus did not travel alone. His expedition paved the way for a long line of explorers, conquistadors, and settlers. Figures, like Hernan Cortes and Francisco Pizarro, followed in his footsteps, seeking gold, land, and glory. Maps were drawn, trade routes established, and European influence spread across continents. The so-called discovery of America was therefore a complex mixture of exploration, ambition, and consequence, an event that reshaped the globe politically, economically, and culturally. The story of Columbus is also a story of human endurance and ambition. He sailed into the unknown, facing immense dangers and uncertainty. He inspired countless others to venture beyond the horizon, challenging the limits of what was considered possible. But it is equally a story that reminds us that history is never simple. Celebrating discovery without acknowledging the cost to those already living in the lands discovered would be incomplete. The arrival of Columbus transformed the world, but it did so in ways that were both wondrous and devastating. In hindsight, the journey of 1492 can be seen as a turning point in global history. It connected continents, peoples, and ideas in ways never before imagined. Trade, culture, religion, and power were all profoundly reshaped by the events that followed Columbus's landing. Yet, the story of discovery is incomplete without remembering the voices of the indigenous peoples, whose lives were forever changed. Understanding this dual perspective allows us to appreciate both the courage of exploration and the consequences it brought. Columbus's voyage was not just a story of ships and sailors. It was a human drama, filled with hope, fear, and ambition. It was a tale of leadership in the face of uncertainty, of curiosity that overcame fear, and of encounters that forever changed the world. From the first glimpse of land on the horizon to the long-term impact on continents and civilizations, the events of 1492 remind us that exploration is as much about human character as it is about geography. And so, the story of Columbus is a turning point not only in history books but in the imagination of humanity. It is a story of adventure, of the human desire to know the unknown, and of the complex consequences that follow when worlds collide. The voyage of the Nina, Pinta, and the Santa Maria remains one of the most dramatic and transformative journeys in history, forever changing the course of the Americas and the world itself. While Christopher Columbus' journey in 1492 is the most famous in history, it was far from the only voyage that shaped the European understanding of the world. Discovery was never the work of a single individual. It was the result of centuries of daring, curiosity, and careful observation by countless explorers. Among these figures, Amerigo Vespucci stands out as someone whose contributions fundamentally changed the way Europe viewed the New World. So significant were his voyages that the continents themselves, North and South America, bear his name. Amerigo Vespucci was born in Florence, Italy, in 1454, a time when Europe was beginning to awaken to the possibilities of global trade and exploration. Unlike Columbus, whose primary goal was to find a western route to Asia, Vespucci's expeditions were more scientific in nature. He carefully observed the lands he visited, noting the shape of coastlines, the course of rivers, the climate, and the plants and animals he encountered. He also recorded detailed accounts of the people he met, documenting their societies, languages, and customs. Through these careful observations, Vespucci reached a groundbreaking conclusion. The lands he explored were not the outskirts of Asia, as Columbus had believed they were a completely new continent, previously unknown to Europeans. This insight transformed European geography and understanding of the world. Prior to Vespucci's observations, maps of the Atlantic were filled with guesswork, myths, and imaginary islands. The concept of a new world was just beginning to take shape, and Vespucci's meticulous records helped mapmakers correct errors, draw accurate coastlines, and understand that these lands were separate from Asia. Without his contributions, the European view of the Americas would have remained confusing and incomplete for decades, if not centuries. Yet Vespucci's story is only one thread in a larger tapestry of exploration. For every famous name, there were dozens of other adventurers whose courage and knowledge made these journeys possible. Sailors, navigators, cartographers, chroniclers, and even financiers played critical roles. Many of them risked their lives in storms, battled disease, and ventured into territories inhabited by unknown peoples. Some returned with maps, journals, or sketches that would later guide future expeditions. Others never returned, lost to the vast and unpredictable seas. Their contributions were essential, yet history often remembers only the few whose names became legendary. The history of exploration also includes women, whose courage and influence are rarely highlighted in textbooks. While women were often excluded from sailing expeditions, many played critical roles behind the scenes. They provided funding for voyages, maintained essential correspondences, preserved knowledge of earlier discoveries, and sometimes even participated in mapping and documentation. Without their support, many expeditions might never have been undertaken, and crucial knowledge about new lands might have been lost. The contributions of women remind us that discovery is a collective effort, relying not just on the bravery of those at sea, but also on the intelligence, strategy, and resilience of those working on land. Explorers not only charted coastlines, they recorded the lives of the people they encountered. Indigenous civilizations, from small Caribbean communities to large empires in Central and South America, had existed for thousands of years before European arrival. Their societies were rich in culture, technology, and governance. Explorers documented these societies in detail, creating records that would become invaluable for historians, geographers, and future travelers. While these accounts were sometimes biased or misinterpreted, they provided a window into worlds that would otherwise have remained unknown to Europe. The risks faced by these explorers were staggering. Crossing uncharted oceans was a constant gamble. Ships were vulnerable to storms, navigational errors, and structural failures. Sailors often faced starvation, scurvy, or disease, and some expeditions lasted months or even years with little certainty of survival. Encounters with indigenous peoples could be friendly or hostile, and cultural misunderstandings sometimes escalated into violent conflict. Yet, for all the danger, explorers were driven by curiosity, ambition, and the hope of wealth and prestige. Every successful voyage expanded the boundaries of human knowledge and possibility. The cumulative impact of these expeditions reshaped global history. Maps became more accurate, trade routes more reliable, and European understanding of the world far more sophisticated. Knowledge of the Americas' geography allowed for the establishment of settlements, colonies, and eventually trade networks that linked continents in unprecedented ways. The work of explorers like Vespucci and the countless unnamed sailors and cartographers laid the foundation for the age of exploration, a period that would transform politics, commerce, culture, and even science. What makes these stories especially compelling is that discovery is rarely linear. It involves trial and error, dead ends, and the contributions of countless individuals whose efforts were rarely recognized. Mistakes in navigation led to new routes, unplanned landfalls revealed islands and continents, and even failures at sea taught valuable lessons about survival, shipbuilding, and ocean currents. Discovery is a process, not a single event, and it relies on the courage and resilience of many people, not just one hero. Moreover, exploration was not only about conquest and resource extraction, it was about understanding the world and sharing that knowledge. Explorers documented ecosystems, rivers, mountains, and coastlines, creating the first detailed geographic records of the Americas. Their observations informed future navigation, trade, and scientific study. Without this documentation, the knowledge of the New World might have remained fragmented and inaccurate for generations. The story of Vespucci, lesser-known explorers, and the women and men behind the scenes reminds us that history is a mosaic. Every journal, every map, every sketch contributed to a greater understanding of the planet. Europe's knowledge of the world, its ability to navigate the Atlantic, and its eventual colonization of the Americas were built on the collective courage, intelligence, and persistence of these individuals. Their contributions show that discovery is not just about who arrived first. It is about who observed, documented, and shared knowledge, turning the unknown into the known. In reflecting on these unsung heroes, we can see that exploration is as much about curiosity and intellect as it is about bravery. It is about the willingness to face the unknown, to endure hardship, and to contribute to a collective understanding of the world. Without the meticulous observations of Vespucci, without the courage of unnamed sailors, and without the support of women and other contributors, the New World might have remained a shadowy mystery in European imagination for far longer. Ultimately, the legacy of these explorers is enduring. The continents themselves bear Vespucci's name, a reminder of the importance of careful observation and insight. The maps, journals, and sketches, created by lesser-known adventurers, form the foundation of modern geography, and the spirit of curiosity and courage that drove them continues to inspire us today. Whether we are exploring the depths of the ocean, the vastness of space, or the frontiers of science, the story of exploration teaches a powerful lesson. History is not just the story of the famous, it is the story of countless individuals whose curiosity, courage, and determination shaped the world. Every discovery, every observation, and every small step into the unknown contributed to a greater understanding of our planet. From Vespucci to the forgotten sailors, from the women behind the expeditions to the cartographers who drew the first accurate maps, the adventure of discovery was and remains a collective human achievement, reminding us that curiosity, perseverance, and courage can expand the boundaries of what is possible. The discovery of America was not a single moment frozen in time. It was not a sudden flash of inspiration or a single ship appearing on the horizon. Instead, it was a long, complex journey and accumulation of stories, mistakes, triumphs, and human daring that spanned centuries. From the first daring Norse sailors who braved icy seas, to the meticulous observations of explorers like Amerigo Vespucci, each voyage contributed a piece to a puzzle that would eventually reveal the vast continents of the New World. When we think about discovery, we often focus on the famous names Columbus, Vespucci, Cabot. But the truth is far richer and more nuanced. Countless men and women risked life and limb for the sake of exploration. Each journey, whether successful or failed, added knowledge to the collective understanding of the world. Sailors learned to read the stars, understand the winds, and navigate dangerous waters. Cartographers turned their sketches and observations into maps, slowly unveiling a world that had been hidden from Europe for millennia. Even the mistakes mattered. Ships lost at sea taught navigators valuable lessons about currents, storms, and shipbuilding. Miscalculations of distance forced explorers to innovate, improving navigation tools and maritime technology. The Vikings taught that crossing the Atlantic was possible. Cabot opened northern routes to North America. Columbus initiated sustained contact, and Vespucci clarified the true nature of the continents. These individual efforts combined to reveal the New World to Europe, laying the foundation for trade, colonization, and the eventual globalization of human societies. But the lesson of discovery goes beyond maps and trade routes. It is a story about human curiosity and the desire to explore the unknown. It teaches us that progress is rarely the result of a single action. It is the accumulation of small, courageous steps. Each sailor who braved a storm, each cartographer who recorded a coastline, and each chronicler who preserved a story contributed to the larger narrative. History, therefore, is not just about famous names. It is about the countless untold stories that shape the world. Even today, the spirit of exploration continues to inspire. While oceans are no longer uncharted, humanity still reaches for the unknown into space, the deep oceans, and the frontiers of science and technology. The courage, curiosity, and determination that drove early explorers to cross the Atlantic are the same qualities that push people to innovate, discover, and overcome challenges in the modern world. The adventure of discovery, in all its forms, remains a fundamental part of human nature. In reflecting on the discovery of America, we realize that it is not a static story confined to history books. It is a living narrative, full of lessons about courage, curiosity, and the consequences of our actions. It reminds us that knowledge is built incrementally, through observation, risk-taking, and a willingness to venture into the unknown. The continents were not discovered in a single instant. They were revealed through centuries of human effort, imagination, and perseverance. Ultimately, the story of exploration is a story about connection between continents, peoples, and ideas. From the icy seas navigated by the Vikings to the Caribbean islands first encountered by Columbus, from the careful records of Vespucci to the maps drawn by countless unnamed cartographers, each effort helped knit together a world that had once seemed impossibly vast and disconnected. It teaches us that human curiosity knows no bounds, and that even in the face of fear and uncertainty, the desire to explore can reshape civilizations. So, when we remember the discovery of America, we must remember both the triumphs and the challenges, the famous names and the unsung heroes. We must honor the courage of those who ventured into the unknown, the lessons learned from their mistakes, and the knowledge they left for generations to come. From the Vikings to Columbus, from forgotten sailors to brave cartographers, the adventure of discovery continues to inspire us. It is a story that reminds us that the unknown is never truly unreachable, and that humanity's greatest achievements are often built on the curiosity and determination of countless individuals, working together across time and space.